numbers of participants keeps increasing. So I would just suggest that we wait for like another couple of minutes for people to be on board, because I can see that the numbers are increasing now. Unfortunately, maybe as panelists you can see that, but maybe participants won't see it. But let's just wait for another 5 minutes. Once again, good morning, dear participants, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, all colleagues. I'll be the webinar moderator this morning, actually. On the webinar is on gender smart investing in support of inclusive growth in North Africa. I just want to say just a few notes before we start. I just want to bring to your kind attention that there is availability of Arabic, French, and English interpretation. You can just click the appropriate button. Like we have the numbers of participants are increasing. So by the time we start, for now, we have 57, but we have above 150 participants registering from the academia, the private sector, different UN organizations, of course, Oxford Economics, European Bank, EBRD, so many participants actually. The webinar actually have like a main objective to just shed light on gender lens investing and its impact on entrepreneurship in North Africa. Basically, we will discuss the major challenges facing North African women-led and owned firms in accessing finance. And of course, with every challenge, there are opportunities and there are good practices. So the webinar will be a great opportunity to share as well good practices for promoting gender lens investment in North Africa. Without any further delay, I will just stick with the agenda. We first will have opening remarks by Dr. Susanna Brixiova-Szwidrowski, the director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa's sub-regional office for North Africa here in Morocco. So Dr. Susanna, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amal, and dear guests, distinguished participants. It's really a great honor and pleasure for me to open this webinar on important topic of gender smart investment for inclusive growth in North Africa. We all know that low female employment in our region is one of the key challenges for our region. So the webinar speaks directly to that. It also speaks to the specialty of our office, which focuses on employment. So, and while over the past decades, the gender gap in education has been closing, in employment it persists between men and women, together with the very low female employment. And increasing this female employment is particularly important today in North Africa's middle-income countries, also because they are beginning to face challenges of aging population and weakening dependency ratio. So the enhanced female employment and participation would help to address that. The webinar today is also speaking to another important challenge of our region, which is underdeveloped private sector, which really could be more active and vibrant and make greater contribution to the economy. So female entrepreneurship will help in that regard. And as Dr. Amal mentioned, the investment is particularly important because access to finance is one of the key challenges for female entrepreneurs. And we know that basically bringing women to labor markets is not just fair issue of justice. It has been shown it's a good economics, and in particular, women bring different and complementary skills. If they are well utilized, this can really enhance the economic growth and well-being of everyone. Now, beyond economics, it has been also shown that female participation in labor market and education has very positive impact on their families and children, and women invest more in human capital than men. So it also has a very, very good results for future generations. Now, being a United Nations agency, we cannot forget sustainable development and sustainable development goals. So this webinar and this report speaks directly to, obviously, SDG 5, gender equality, but equally important to SDG 8, decent employment and economic growth, SDG 10, inequality, and also SDG 1, poverty, because women are more impacted by, disproportionately impacted by poverty and more vulnerable to it than men. So with that, I would also like to mention that this is actually third in the very successful series of report that was initiated Dr. Amal and Oxford Economics. So we had previously report on job creation in Africa, and we also recently had a report on human capital. So now we have a third report in this fruitful collaboration. So with those opening remarks, I would like to thank, first of all, our team, and especially Dr. Amal for this initiative, and then everybody from our office contributing, and of course our partners who, without whom we obviously would not be having this seminar, and also our esteemed guest, Dr. Mowafi from American University of Cairo, who will join us with her perspective. So thank you very much, and over to you, Amal, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susanna, for the opening remarks. In fact, this signals the strong, fruitful collaboration with Oxford Economics, and of course all the work by our office. So thank you for that. Now I have the honor to present Dr. Cobus de Hart, who will present the study for us and its main recommendations. Actually, Dr. Cobus is currently the Director of Consulting at Oxford Economics Africa. Previously, he was the Oxford Economics Chief Economist for North and West Africa. He has been at Oxford Economics for many years and has worked on a significant number of projects for both local and international clients, governments, and multilateral institutions. Without any further ado, I'm giving the floor to Dr. Cobus to share his presentation on the study and its main recommendations for us. The floor is yours, Dr. Cobus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amal and Susanna. I just want to share my screen. Can I just confirm that everyone can see the cover slide of the PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so good day, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present the main findings of our research to you today. So as was already mentioned, my name is Cobus de Hart, and I work for the Africa branch of Oxford Economics. And we, together with the ECA North Africa office, conducted this study on gender smart investing in support of inclusive growth in North Africa. So in a nutshell, the study investigates the entrepreneurial and also the SME landscapes across the North Africa region, with a specific focus on the role being fulfilled by women specifically. And this is then complemented by an assessment of how policies and various other initiatives, such as gender smart investing, can be leveraged to address these social gaps, particularly looking also at gender inequality. And this is ultimately towards the ultimate goals of accelerated economic growth, development, and job creation. Now, just to give you an idea of our approach, we start off by considering the employment landscape across North Africa and also looking at trends along gender lines. And this is to gauge whether there are significant gaps, and if so, to what extent. Then we delve deeper into the role women fulfill in the North African business landscape. And this is to better understand the underlying business and gender dynamics. Then we turn our focus to the entrepreneurship and SMEs specifically, highlighting firstly why this is important, but also looking at it from a North African perspective. Then we consider gender smart investing more specifically, taking a closer look at what this actually means, but also how it can be used to address some of the social and development challenges that we have identified through our analysis. And obviously then public policy, which has a very vital role to play, and hence this being the next key focus area. Before we then wrap up with some concluding, wrap up rather with our key recommendations. Okay, so starting off with the North African employment scene. Now, this graph shows the percentage of the working age population that is employed by gender. Now, what we can see is that across most North African countries, the employment share for men lags the global average, but not by such a significant margin. Now, the share hovers just below the 60% mark for the North African countries versus a global average of about 70%. Now, the picture for females is very different. The ratio of employed females to the working age population is extremely low at about 20% across the 7 countries. Now, put differently, this means that about 1 out of every 5 working age women are classified as being employed. This ratio is also 3 times lower than compared to the employment share for men across North Africa. It is also less than half the global average for females at about 45%. Hence, it is quite a substantial gap. Now, if we look at unemployment rates by gender for countries with more up-to-date information, it is immediately clear that from this graph rather, that unemployment is significantly higher for women. In fact, by 2022, female unemployment was around 3.7 times higher in the case for Egypt. It was about 1.7 times higher in Morocco and about 1.5 times higher than the male unemployment rate in Tunisia. Now, another dynamic to consider here is the impact of COVID-19 and the various related shocks thereof. Now, in this regard, the unemployment gap between women and men has widened in the case of Egypt. It has remained stable in Morocco, and it has narrowed slightly in Tunisia. But I think it's important to note that this employment gap remains fairly substantial. So what are the key takeaways at this stage? Well, firstly, and as was already mentioned previously, things like labor force participation may very well be playing a role, and there's other factors also playing a role here. But it's still quite clear that female employment across North Africa is very low compared to the situation for men, and also when viewed against global averages. And related to this is the large and persistent gap in unemployment rates, which are significantly higher for women. Okay, so having established that female unemployment is disproportionately high across North Africa, let's now have a closer look at what role women fulfill in the business landscape. Now, in this analysis, we use data from the World Bank's Enterprise Survey, and the latest available data was for the years 2019 as well as for 2020 for the 3 countries shown on this graph. Now, small firms are defined to have up to 19 employees, medium firms have up to 99 employees, and large firms have 100 or more employees. Now, this graph shows the percentage of firms with majority female ownership. And in general, what we can see is that majority female ownership is extremely low in most cases across countries and also across firm sizes. In the case for Egypt, for example, the prevalence of majority female business ownership is almost 8 times lower than the global average. Morocco's performance is fairly similar on average to that of Egypt's, while the prevalence of majority female ownership in Tunisia is about 2.5 times lower than the global average. But this is still a very substantial gap. Importantly, though, we can also see that the majority female ownership is significantly more prevalent with small and, in some cases, medium-sized firms. Now, if we look at a bit of a broader definition, which relates to just female participation in business ownership, as opposed to majority female ownership. So if we look at female participation in business ownership, the picture does improve somewhat, at least in the case for Tunisia, as you can see there, with the other two countries still lagging the global average by a significant margin. It is however, worth highlighting here that this definition does not stipulate the share of female ownership in these businesses. So in other words, we can't say whether the women in these businesses held a 5% ownership share or a 45% ownership share, or even something like a 51%, which would be a majority female ownership share. We won't be able to, we can't say whether that is the case. But what we do know is that in more than 70% of these businesses, females have minority ownership shares. And this in turn is most likely explains why we see this shift towards females participating more in ownership with larger firms. Given that majority female ownership typically leans more to the smaller end of the business spectrum, as we showed on the previous slide. Now, in general, this may also hint that small firms with majority female ownership are faced with particular challenges when attempting to scale up their business operations. Next, we looked at whether there are any differences in terms of firm performance by gender of ownership. Now, in this analysis, we had to use the broader female definition, rather the broader definition of female participation in ownership. And this is simply because majority female ownership is so low, and hence the samples are too small. So one needs to view the results with that limitation in mind. So, but having said this, there is still some evidence that firms with female participation in ownership are linked with weaker sales performance. But I must admit, our findings show that this is very marginally so. There's also evidence that firms with female participation in ownership are associated with stronger employment growth to some extent. But what was more interesting is stronger evidence pointing to some interesting findings in terms of the employment patterns for smaller firms specifically, which is what we'll be looking at next. So looking only at small firms, we can see from the graph on the left that on average, firms with female participation in ownership typically employ more workers. Now, while this finding holds for all three countries considered, it is more evident in the cases for Morocco and Tunisia than it is in the case for Egypt. The graph on the right, meanwhile, shows that the proportion of female workers is also higher. In other words, small firms with female participation in ownership tend to employ more women. Again, this finding holds across all three countries, but it is more evident in the cases for Egypt and Morocco than for the case for Tunisia. So what are the key takeaways at this stage? Well, the findings suggest that policies, strategies, and also investments aimed at supporting female-owned SMEs may have a greater impact and also a greater multiplier effect towards creating more jobs for women. And in turn, this can obviously help address both the large employment gap between males and females and the prevalence of high female unemployment across North Africa. Now, let us turn our attention to the role of now let's turn our attention to the role of entrepreneurship and SMEs more specifically. So the first question one would typically ask here relates to why entrepreneurship and SMEs are deemed to be important. Now, in this instance, there's been ample academic and other research on this topic, but for the purpose of this study, two key findings are especially relevant, and I've listed them on the slides here. So firstly, a larger number of small businesses and new startups are positively linked to more rapid economic growth. Secondly, there is a positive correlation between new and small businesses, between new and small business activity and also job creation. So in short, increased entrepreneurial and SME activity ultimately serves to boost economic growth and also boost employment creation and support job creation. Now, it's also important to note that small businesses account for very substantial shares of total employment. And this is even more so in the cases for low and middle income countries, where these employment shares can often be in excess of 70%. In fact, the International Labour Organization highlights that support for small businesses should be a central part of development policies in low and middle income settings, like the countries across North Africa. But while noting the substantial potential benefits to be had, entrepreneurs and SMEs across North African countries are still faced by various obstacles. And this is what we will be considering next. Now, first, we consider the obstacles faced specifically by entrepreneurs. So we're only looking at entrepreneurs at this stage. So we're looking at entrepreneurs in Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia. So to explain this graph a little bit better, scores closer to 0 mean conditions are very inadequate, with higher scores meaning conditions are more favorable. Now, the gray shaded area on the spider chart shows the median value. So every category where the score falls within this area is deemed to be broadly inadequate. Now, firstly, we can see that the entrepreneurial conditions in general are fairly poor across these countries. In fact, only in 3 of the 12 framework conditions do one of the countries exceed the median value of 5. That means that in 9 of the 12 categories, conditions are considered to be more inadequate. Now, the categories with the weakest scores include areas around entrepreneurial education, government policies and support programs, R&D transfer, market openness, and also access to finance. Now, if we turn our attention to SMEs, the World Bank's Enterprise Survey identifies access to finance, tax rates, and electricity as being among the major constraints being faced by SMEs. Now, as is evident from this chart, the extent to which these affect companies of different sizes vary from one country to the next. Now, one finding which is uniform across all these countries is that access to finance is more problematic for smaller firms. I'll repeat that. One finding which is uniform across all these countries is that access to finance is more problematic for small firms, which is not particularly surprising. What these findings don't yet show is whether there are any gender differences, such as, for example, in terms of access to finance. Now, in this regard, the graph shown here is very informative. It shows the percentage of men and women which have borrowed money to start or expand a business. Now, these figures clearly show that women are far less likely to borrow money for business reasons than compared to men. And this may be indicative of women finding it more difficult to access or to gain access to finance. So just to recap, it is clear from the literature that supporting entrepreneurs and SMEs help boost economic growth and employment, and this can help address various social challenges such as gender equality. But entrepreneurs and SMEs are still faced with various obstacles across the North African countries. And one of these obstacles is the difficulty in accessing financing, more so for smaller firms and also more so for women. And this is then where gender smart investing comes into play. Now, at this stage, it's probably worth explaining what does gender smart investing, or sometimes also referred to as gender lens investing, what does this actually mean? Now, it is typically defined as follows: the process by which gender smart individuals and organizations apply a gender smart approach to investment design to simultaneously generate a financial return and to advance gender equality. However, it is important to highlight that gender smart investing is not just about providing finance or access to capital. Gender smart investing typically entails three broad approaches. Now, the first is providing female-owned businesses or startups with capital or finance, either to expand their business operations or to start a business. The second approach is where companies focus on improving gender equality, either internally in the company itself through its own internal policies, or where a company drives gender-based initiatives in their respective value chains, such as through corporate social responsibility or other social initiatives. An example of this would be, for example, a larger firm which targets female-owned businesses to source supplies from and to provide training to, such as how to improve quality of the product, stock control, and how to improve on lead times for delivery, for example. And this would obviously also be to the benefit of the larger firm. So this is an example of how the value chain approach could work. And then finally, gender smart investors can also target specific sectors that employ a large share of women, or invest in products and services which can help women in their entrepreneurial or business endeavors. An example of this would be, for example, digital solutions which make gaining access to finance easier for women. So what are some of the key takeaways in this case? Well, firstly, gender smart investing can play a key role in closing the gender gap. And secondly, gender smart investing is not just about access to finance, although that is and remains a very important part thereof. Now, if we look at the North African region specifically, gender smart investing has started gaining some traction, and a number of examples are discussed in our report. But that said, these initiatives have mostly been driven by development finance institutions and multilaterals, and a lot more can still be done. But a more holistic approach from all stakeholders is what is ultimately required. And that then brings us to the pivotal and the very important role of public policy. So in our analysis, and as is also outlined in our report, we considered various policies and also examined the findings from policy reviews in the literature. Now, for the purpose of this presentation, I won't go into too much detail about specific policies, but I will rather summarize the main findings of our review and analysis, which again is also supported by other studies with a focus rather on policy review. Now, the first point worth highlighting is that most North African countries have made considerable progress in adopting comprehensive legislation concerning SMEs and also in some cases related to entrepreneurship. However, these policies often tend to be gender neutral, thus not specifically addressing the needs of female business owners and entrepreneurs. Also, policies currently in place are often isolated in that they are not always incorporated into national objectives, national plans, strategic plans, action plans, and so on. And there's also the cross-cutting strategies, and I mentioned the action plans. These aren't always applied in the same manner across the different spheres of the public sector. Okay, to conclude then from my side, I will briefly discuss the main recommendations stemming from our investigation. The first recommendation is that policies need to be enhanced to incorporate a specific focus on female entrepreneurs and SMEs rather than a pure gender neutral approach. Secondly, policy alignment needs to be improved to ensure alignment with national objectives and cross-cutting strategies and action plans. Thirdly, policies should create an enabling environment and incentivize increased participation from the private sector and other stakeholders. Then all stakeholders need to realize that gender lens investing is not just about finance, but also about education, skills development, and a range of other supportive interventions. Also, there is still significant room for development partners as well as the private sector to expand the gender-based interventions across North Africa. Again, noting that this is not just about access to finance. And then finally, there ultimately needs to be a shift in social perceptions regarding the role for women. And that's all from my side. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kobus, for this excellent presentation. I think we still have a few minutes before we start with the other distinguished panelist, Dr. Amal Mouafi. So I will take advantage of my role as a moderator and raise a few questions, before the other presentation. And of course, we have a long session on questions and comments. First of all, could you please give us an example of a gender smart initiative? Can you just shed more light on that? This is one thing. Also, throughout your presentation, you mentioned that, of course, supporting SMEs and entrepreneurship will boost economic growth and job creation. Are there any other benefits? Can you just elaborate more on other benefits of supporting SMEs and entrepreneurships? Also, in one of your recommendations was about leveraging more support from a wider range of stakeholders. Actually, we have to have a kind of actionable recommendation, and I'm really curious to know how this could be achieved actually. And finally, in your recommendations also, you said that gender smart investing is about more than just financial investments. Could you please also elaborate more on what you mean by saying that this gender smart investing is about more than just financial investments? Just more clarification. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Amal. I think your first question was around, an example of gender smart investing. I think the most well-known and one of the ones that are biggest in scale is probably the 2X challenge, which was launched by the G7 countries back in 2018. I think they initially planned to launch or to raise about 3 billion worth of capital and funds, but they exceeded the target quite significantly. I think, I can't remember if it was 2019 or 2020, but the ultimate amount of funds they raised was, I think, about $11.5 billion. Now, these funds were then distributed to various development financing institutions and multilaterals, and then divided across regions of the world. I think MENA received just over 600 million, which, looking at the spread, I would argue is a bit low. But then ultimately, these funds were used by multilaterals and development finance institutions to drive various interventions. And I think so this kind of helped catalyze the whole process. And then there's various private equity impact investment firms. One example I can think of from the top of my head is Development Partners International, which is a Pan-African based private equity firm. They, for instance, a certain part of their portfolio is specifically dedicated towards gender lens investing, if I'm not mistaken. But they invest in pharmaceuticals, agro-processing, tech, digitalized solutions, and they've invested in various North African countries across Egypt, Tunisia, and also Algeria, if I recall correctly. Does that suffice for answering the first question? Okay, thanks, Amal.
Thank you.
The second question, I think, was around
like the other benefits of supporting SMEs and entrepreneurships. You just mentioned boosting economic growth and job creation.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much, Amal. You've always got my back. So, yes, obviously there's a host of different benefits to just boosting SMEs or boosting SMEs, and then that boosting growth and job creation. Look, SMEs in general improve competitiveness, and that's what you want in an economy. Another big benefit of SMEs is they are more flexible, right? So they can adapt to market changes much easier than larger firms, and that also makes economies more resilient to shocks. Now, in general, I would say that, and this probably means that a certain country will need to get to a certain level of SMEs in their country, if you want to call it that, a share of SMEs in their country. But there's various spillover effects from SMEs, and one of these, which I think is really important, is a spillover effect in terms of innovation, creating an innovative culture. And obviously there's various other initiatives and various other interventions that support this, things like education, entrepreneurial education, but innovative culture, that is really important from my perspective. Having an innovative culture can ultimately help people find, or help entrepreneurs, innovate or rather, let me put it differently, can help a greater share of the population or the unemployed population to find creative solutions to problems and turn those into businesses.
Okay, thank you.
The second question, something around
The third is actually like about actionable recommendations. You mentioned that, in one of your recommendations, leveraging more support from a wide range of
Yes.
stakeholders. How is this achieved actually? Yeah.
Yes, I think that recommendation really speaks to the role of government, right? So in essence, the role of government is to firstly, well, the role of government is to create an enabling environment to leverage more participation from the private sector. The government, and another aspect to it is that I alluded to in the presentation is the policies or gender-based goals and objectives and targets should be incorporated into national targets and programs and plans, and that'll then feed through to the private sector. You can consider other things such as incentives, for instance, but ultimately I think it stands to government to create that enabling environment for pulling in the private sector and various other stakeholders as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I don't want to take more time because now we'll have a presentation by our esteemed panelist, Dr. Amal Mouafi. The presentation is on gender smart investment in Egypt. So we have here a case study, how to go from... Yes.
I'm sorry, I wanted to ask a question now before I forget on this.
Sure.
I mean, is there a space for other questions, or how is this going to be?
Sure. Go ahead, please. Yeah.
And maybe other colleagues have questions. So sorry for interrupting, Amal, but before we move on far from the topic. So I had to thank you for the excellent presentation, Kobus. And I had two comments and maybe reservations also about one of the two statements, maybe more like question. When you say that the legal framework is gender neutral, perhaps when we look at it narrowly at SMEs, but when we look more broadly in the region, I think there are some inequalities in access to assets, gender inequalities, and inheritance. And this has a major implication, like land ownership is a key collateral. So this basically disadvantages women when asking for finance in that area. So I think, and World Bank has a good study on it, showing various legal inequalities across the world, sectors where women cannot participate. So I don't think it's quite accurate to say legal framework is gender neutral. So that's first point. So we can maybe reflect. Second point about this resilience of SMEs. Yes, they are smaller, so they can be more nimble and more flexible, but they have much fewer resources. And we know from the latest crisis that the small enterprises were much more impacted when it comes to closure and were more negatively impacted than the large ones. So I'm not so sure we can say that being small is advantageous, because large enterprises, as I said, have more resources, established access to credit as trusted partners. They have different options how to address shock. They can reduce the hours of the workforce, or they can lower employment entirely. So I think we need to maybe look a bit more or nuance that statement as we go forward. But these are just, I'm trying to be a bit provocative. I thought this was an excellent report and very important findings, but maybe some of the statements we want to reflect. And this is exactly the purpose of the seminar. So so many thanks again.
No, thank you, Susanna. I'm happy to discuss your comments with you afterwards as well. Thank you.
Just for all distinguished participants, there will be actually like a 45-minute session on questions and comments after the second presentation by our esteemed panelist, Dr. Amal Mouafi. I'll just introduce her by saying few words. Dr. Amal Mouafi actually is the chief of party of USAID Egyptian Pioneers. This is actually like a 9-year, $86 million grant implemented by the American University in Cairo. She is also a faculty member there teaching labor economics. She is the founder and deputy chair of the Board of Women on Innovation Foundation, a board member of UNDP Egypt Network for Integrated Development. And she worked for so many years with the UN in different assignments, actually. She worked upstream as the ILO regional technical specialist for youth employment in Africa, as well as downstreams managing the flagship ILO Canada project on decent jobs for Egypt's young people, with more than 66 government counterparts, employers and workers, organizations, academia, civil society, and youth association. And prior to working with ILO, she was also a project management specialist with USAID, supporting and working with the government of Egypt to establish both the Egyptian Competitiveness Council and the Consumer Protection Authority. Without any further delay, I just give the floor to Dr. Amal Mwafi. Dr. Amal, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amal, for the introduction, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you today, and a very distinct honor. Greetings from the American University in Cairo. And I would also like to thank the Economic Commission Sub-Regional Office for North Africa for the invitation, as well as the opportunity to go through the report, which is an excellent piece of work that I have to echo Dr. Zuzana in commending everybody for the effort that went into it. And it was a great pleasure actually going through the report. So without further ado, allow me to share my screen, and I just want to make sure that everybody could see my screen. Is it coming up?
Yes, I confirm.
Yes.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, so as mentioned, my presentation is looking at how to go from new to normal in terms of gender smart investment in Egypt, and sort of elaborating and broadening on the case of Egypt, given that it is one of the North Africa countries. So I'll first take the recommendations, put forward the 6 salient recommendations that Dr. De Hart ended with, and see how Egypt is faring on those 6 salient recommendations, looking at the outcome, of where Egypt is faring, and looking forward and into the future, how gender-forward policies and practices can move on, and which ones do we sort of prioritize. So looking at the case of Egypt, we see that we have what's called the National Council for Women, and there is a Women Economic Empowerment Strategy. The strategy makes clear reference and very solid focus on female entrepreneurship and SMEs, with some impact indicators and targets already put in place. So that is very clear, as pointed by the arrow over there, that in the base year, it was at 45, at the base year, it was at 22.5%, with a view to move it up to 50% by 2030 as part of Egypt's vision for 2030. This is unpacked, and if we look at the recommendation in terms of enhanced policy focus on female entrepreneurship and SMEs, and when we unpack this strategy, we find that this is divided into several, policy elements, maybe ensuring that the private sector is committed to the proper representation of women on boards of directors, pay attention to diversity of economic sectors established in different governors. We have 27 governors in Egypt, attracting industries that can create direct and indirect employment for women's employment within the value chain, policies and procedures that encourage women to set up their own businesses, expand business development services targeting women, and establishing gender-responsive one-stop shops, scaling up the implementation of establishing economic activity cooperatives that target women, and financial services for initiatives encouraging group savings as well as loans that serve women. Not only that, but also adding and developing banking and non-banking financial services targeting women, including loans to small and medium enterprises, increasing women's knowledge of and facilitating their access to the services, and particularly through, electronic channels, which has been mentioned in the report already. So developing also, and that's key, public purchasing and procurement policies to ensure a larger share of products from female-owned small enterprises and cooperatives, especially that government and public procurements are quite big in this part of the world. So that's on the first recommendation. So that is sort of covered on that particular point. Moving forward and to the second recommendation, which was improved policy alignment, and we find that this is cascaded in some of the legislative frameworks that exist in Egypt, looking, for example, at the investment law. We have an investment law that was put forward in 2017, and there's a provision on gender equality. So this is like a signal to the market, if you wish, on gender equality, and it comes as the second article, actually, and it mentions specifically that the principles of equality of investment of opportunities and equal opportunities regardless of size, location, and project, and without discrimination on the basis of gender. So there is some reference there. There is some reference also in the SMEs law for 2020, but it's not as clear and distinct there, but there are some underlying messages there. And also, if we continue on the policy alignment, the Financial Regulatory Authority in Egypt has been quite active on that front, working with the companies that are listed in the Egyptian Stock Exchange to ensure that the percentage of women representation on boards is up to 25%, or have at least 2 women members on board. And this is particularly important because with women being on boards at the top, you can, to a large extent, expect to see women being incorporated at the bottom in the value chains. So of those companies. So the FRA, or the Financial Regulatory Authority, has set in implementing the national strategy for empowerment of Egyptian women, and it targets that 30% share of senior management roles for women by 2030. And I'll come back to that, and we can see a lot of acceleration happening on this front. Moreover, another signal or incentive that is put is the engagement rate, which is the rate of engagement with women, whether on individual or regular basis.
Sorry.
And quick for the translators, right?
Yes, please. Yeah, we just get a request from them to just. Okay, thank you.
Sorry for that.
No problem. Yeah.
Okay, I'll slow down a bit. So on the engagement rate with the women, this is a huge incentive, and if companies manage to engage at 25% or more, they get a reduction in the development fees or services that are being offered to them per their engagement with women, and encourages these bodies to expand such engagements. So clearly there are incentives that are put in the policy framework, and there's alignment with the overarching policy on that front. Moving to support from the third recommendation, which is support from a wide range of stakeholders. And I'll just take a sample here. And we see that there are 86 companies in Egypt that have subscribed to the UN Women Empowerment Principles, including the Financial Regulatory Authority, which is the first regulatory authority to sign this declaration. So that's, on the private sector end. And, I'm very humbled to be sitting at the American University in Cairo, where we have the Women on Boards Observatory. It's here at the School of Business, and it produces annually a report that monitors the percentage of women on board so that we reach the goal of the 30% by 2030. And the latest report in 2022 mentions that we have reached a level of 19.7%, and that's a 3% increase from the previous year. With this consistent 3% annual increase for the last couple of years, this will enable Egypt to sort of reach the objective of the strategy in 2026 rather than 2023, if the task continues to be repeated in the present. and the future. More so, the International Labour Organization has established gender and SME units in the Federation of Egyptian Industries. The Federation of Egyptian Industries is the employers' organizations of Egypt, and this is put forward with a view towards increasing the female representation among the companies and ensuring that SMEs are also part of the supply chain of the various companies, including SMEs led and owned by women. So these are just some examples. There are many other examples just to give you a flavor of what's happening. Of course, we have more than 34 development organizations working here in Egypt, whether they are multilateral organizations or bilateral organizations. And I'll just pick one example with the Women Entrepreneurship Finance Initiative, or WIFI. So in Egypt, WIFI has played an important role in supporting the growth and development of women-led small and medium enterprises, and WIFI has partnered with the International Finance Corporation to provide funding and support to female entrepreneurs in Egypt with a focus on tourism, agribusiness, and technology. Also, WIFI has been working with the Central Bank of Egypt to build its financial inclusion strategy geared towards gender-based financial inclusion strategy. Moving to the fourth recommendation, which talks about more, providing financial services and non-financial services. So the Micro, Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency, or MISMEDA, is the apex institution that provides credit and financial and non-financial services to SMEs in Egypt. And looking at what they've been doing over the last 7 years, we can see that they have around 6,500 loans to small and micro enterprises that were catering to women. But the sad fact is that of those, the majority, if not the bulk, is for micro enterprises, and less so for small businesses, and perhaps none for the medium enterprises. And this raises a big question mark here on what type of enterprises are being counted, because when we talk about micro enterprises, and that's the bulk that are getting the support in terms of finance, these are own account workers. This is a one-person livelihood intervention. These are what the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor calls the entrepreneurs of necessity. These are not the entrepreneurs for innovation, and these are not the entrepreneurs of opportunity. So that's very important to look at. Those loans have provided the opportunity for those enterprises to create around 700,041 job opportunities across all governments. But now let's move to what has been offered in terms of the training, and this is less, of a bigger figure, and we're talking about 24 women trained on entrepreneurship skills, and this echoes what Dr. Hart was speaking about in terms of the GEM reports on entrepreneurship education. The report was speaking about basic education, but now we're talking about people who are in business, and these are the type of the trainings that they're getting. And more on the technical side, you'll see that it's geared towards handicraft and heritage industries. And this is very important, and I'll come to that particular point later. Another initiative that is taken by Bank Misr, which is one of the 3 biggest national banks in Egypt, and it has branches all over the country. It's well branched, if you wish. And this bank has offered, with the support of the International Finance Corporation, the first integrated financing program supporting Egyptian women entrepreneurs under the name of SET. It offers financial and non-financial services for female entrepreneurs, including training sessions, business development needs, and other things. What is particularly interesting in that particular product is that it caters to deferring installments during maternity leave for a period of 3 months, among other things. Another bank that is using its corporate social responsibility is the Alex Bank. Alex Bank is providing a number of initiatives, and you can see that those initiatives are catering to still the same audience of micro entrepreneurs rather than small or medium entrepreneurs. It's a lot of micro loans that are being provided. The majority is in the area of the handicrafts sector as well. There's some development in 2020 with sort of the Ghalia platform, which is for multiple initiatives that aim to empower women in the fields of education, employment, and economic empowerment, as well as in health and well-being. Of course, well-being has come into play with COVID, and a lot of business is being generated around the area of well-being, but where do women fare in that particular landscape? So moving on to the fifth recommendation, where DFI's private sector and investors can expand in North Africa interventions, there is a business case for and an impact case actually for gender smart investments. And there's a survey that was conducted by the Arab Women Empowerment Fund to 21 Egyptian firms, and it was trying to assess the female representations, whether on board, senior management, and employee levels, and how that has had latent commercial benefits. And we can see that the survey provides evidence that female-owned businesses within the firm's supply chain are very reliable, creative, and innovative. So there is a business case and there is an impact case, as mentioned. Now, the last recommendation speaks to shifting social perception on the role of women. And when we speak about shifting the social perception on the role of women, I think since the 1960s, a lot of work has been done in terms of shifting this perception. At least from the government side, a lot of attempts have taken place. But even as of recent, in 2017, the year was dedicated for Egyptian women, and many laws and amendments to existing laws were introduced. Working on women service centers for daycare services was provided and expanded upon so as to increase the female participation in the labor market. The National Council of Women has not been short in providing awareness campaigns, even at the village level, not even at the government level, but going to each and every village through what they call as the rural leaders, and trying to raise awareness on various issues relevant to female empowerment, whether it's at the economic, social, and political level. And even a number of the global initiatives that have been taking place have been brought home over here. For example, the He for She initiative by the UN Women was uptaken by Cairo University. So if we look at those various, interventions and initiatives, that should build a good picture, but unfortunately not. And this is what the numbers are telling us. Dr. Hart spoke about being 8 times lower than the global average in terms of female participation and ownership. And, this is just what we are seeing in this slide. And not only that, but I would like to add that this ownership rests not in the formal sector, but 80% of it is in the informal sector. An ILO study that was conducted in 2017 tells us that 73% of 200 women surveyed have not registered their enterprises. So to add ill to injury on that front. So, those policy recommendations are very important, but more needs to be done. And I was very happy to hear, a question on actionable policy items. And this is where I would like to turn to the third and last part of my presentation. And, when we speak about policy, when the policies were put in place back in 2015, along with the Sustainable Development Goals, and each country is putting its vision with respect to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The world in 2015 is a totally different world than we are now in 2023. There are so many structural transformations happening, with the green transition, technological change, supply chain disruptions, post-pandemic, and the changing consumer expectations. So the policies that were put at that time really need to be revised and reviewed, not only because of those structural transformations happening right now, but also the speed at which they're happening. The speed is exponential. So this calls for a review of those policies. And when we speak about those structural transformations, a lot of it has to do with the need to have STEM skills and technical and vocational and general education geared towards STEM skills. And unfortunately, the figures tell us that not so many females are enrolled in the STEM fields, whether at the secondary or tertiary level of education. Females tend to be concentrated in the arts sections. So this means that they're going to be missing on the future if those technical skills are not put. And also a recent World Economic Forum report was issued on Labor Day, and it talked a lot about the future and the future of the soft skills and what are the soft skills needed. The soft skills needed in the future are not the soft skills that we are talking about, in the past. And in the report, the Gender Smart report, folks speaks about soft skills, but we need to be looking at the new soft skills that are needed: analytical skills, creative thinking, marketing and media, AI and big data, service orientation, customer service, technological literacy. So it's no longer just financial literacy. We need to be talking about technological literacy, leadership and social influence, the role of social media and what have you. Quality control, multilingualism, and curiosity, lifelong learning. We need to make sure that what we have learned, we are able to unlearn and relearn new things, and the level of skilling and upskilling and reskilling that happens, and the speed at which this happens is very important. Now, speaking about the policies, so this means that policies need to be sort of assessed and readdressed, but also important, Egypt has the policies and many of the policies I've spoken about, but there is a problem in implementation. And so second comes implementation. Policies might not be implemented or might not be implemented wholeheartedly or as envisioned. And also, there's lack of consistent and constant, monitoring and evaluation of those policies. It does happen with DFIs, but is the government monitoring its own policies? Is the government checking what's happening with respect to the policies in terms of implementation? Do we have social accountability? Are we asking the right questions through the legislative bodies to make sure that those policies are really being, implemented? And if they're not being implemented, why aren't they being implemented? We need to learn from what's not happening, what's not working, and take what's working and move with it. We tend to speak about, global best practices in putting policies, but also following up on them is very, very important in terms of learning and research and taking this learning into evidence-based, policy making in the future. So that's, on the policy level. Moving to the institutional level, or the practice, I look at, the policy and I look at the practice. And with the practice, I think we need to be campaigning for some government investment in female-run VCs to supporting them. And more important, encouraging more women to establish VCs themselves. We tend to focus on female entrepreneurship only, but we do not focus on female fund managers. The notion of hemophilia was brought up in the report. So, the attraction of the likes. So, and we tend, when we look at impact investment funds, you will find that the investment part is male dominated while the impact part is female dominated. We need females to be on the investment side. We need females to be looking and making the financial decisions, not only assessing the outcome of those decisions. And this goes back to the area where I spoke about earlier about STEM education. So a lot of the financing that is coming in the future, we know that for sure is coming around climate change, and there's going to be a lot of financing offered in terms of climate finance. How to apply a gender lens to this climate finance? And, you know, women need to come together also. We need to think of strengthening businesswomen associations as platforms for peer-to-peer knowledge sharing and learning. These are also opportunities to give women a voice, an opportunity to give women the chance to network, because women do not have the same access to network as men, so they need to have this platform to support them. Last but not least, I would like to add on, the missing middle. And the World Bank a couple of years ago came with a very interesting report about the missing middle in the MENA region. We tend to have, you know, small and big companies. We tend to have a missing middle. And we need to make sure that females are filling this missing middle, because we still have this missing middle despite all those years. And this is the missing middle that will boost job creation in that particular part of the world. So if we want females to fill this gap of missing middle, we need to work with them on the risk-averse nature, the way females are taught and educated, or many people, not only females in this part of the world, we tend to be risk averse. We tend to be getting educated through rote learning. We have to sort of put forward, you know, what we have been taught, and we're not allowed to sort of think, innovate, or go out of the box. And more so for women, they're less aggressive with their growth plans. So how do they become more aggressive with their growth plans in a way that would allow funders to look into them, and also tailoring tailoring products to be more, and services, of course, to be more women-centric. So with that, I would wrap my intervention and happy to take questions on that front.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amal, for the excellent presentation. Actually, we are really on time, which is great. Actually, we have like almost 45 minutes for questions and comments from distinguished participants. You have two options, whether you can click on the raise hand button to be given the floor. I can give you the floor, or my colleague in charge of IT can do that. You can also send questions on the chat box or questions and answer button you have on your screen. And we strongly encourage you also to share your comments, questions, inputs in our knowledge network, where you're an esteemed part of it, actually, in order to really enrich the quality of the report. Maybe I take advantage of just few minutes till other distinguished participants start, raising some questions or comments, to ask you, Dr. Amal, what aspects could have been overlooked in our discourse on gender-smart investment approaches? Could you please just share with us your experience on that? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. I think, we need to talk about two things. First, intentionality. We need to be very intentional with our policies. And the other thing is intersectionality. And the report touches upon holistic approaches. But I believe when we are talking about, a gender lens, we need to make sure that we have a 360 approach, that while we think that if we provide finance or non-financial services to empower women economically, that will be taken up, and that would be sort of solve the story. But the problems that women face are 360. You know, it's social, it's around the political participation, around many other things. So we need to make sure that all aspects are looked at, and it's not just solving, you know, the problem of the economic empowerment. And here I would like to make reference to one of the entities here in Egypt as a board member, which is Al Nida Foundation, funded by and started by UNDP, which caters one of the poorest governors, caters to the women in one of the poorest governorates in Egypt, in Upper Egypt. It's called Qana. And the situation is very dire. It's actually one of the 3 poorest governorates in the nation. And at the beginning, you know, they started to work with women in terms of providing financial support and non-financial support. And then after that, they realized that the problems are bigger than that. And the interventions started to be on a 360 level. And with those type of interventions, the women fared better, and the results after monitoring and evaluation in terms of their impact on their employment and other things was sort of much better when this aspect was taken into consideration. Being deliberate and being intersectional.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll really go back to these 2 expressions, but now I need to go to give the floor to 2 participants that raise hands. First is Mr. Zakaria Fahim. You have the floor.
Oui, bonjour. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Bon, merci. Bonjour. Donc, très intéressant. Je pense que la traduction est opérée parce que je préfère y aller en français, sauf s'il y a un problème, je peux revenir en anglais, mais si la traduction fonctionne, je continue en français. 2 points en écoutant un peu les 2 interventions qui me paraissent importants si on veut effectivement, dans la politique entrepreneuriale du genre, ne pas oublier que sur le continent, l'essentiel aujourd'hui de l'entrepreneuriat, notamment féminin, il est dans l'informel, et que très souvent, on a des vraies problématiques d'accompagnement, ils l'ont dit, non financiers. On a monté un collectif au Maroc qui s'appelle Réseau Femme, où on accompagne à 360 degrés un peu la femme pour l'autonomisation économique. Et on s'est rendu compte que avant de développer le business ou de l'autonomiser, il est très important de la protéger de toutes les tares qui sont aujourd'hui sur beaucoup de femmes qui sont souvent soit sous influence de la famille, soit sous violence, soit donc ou qui ont des problèmes de proximité. Donc comment aujourd'hui on peut, dans le cadre de ces mesures, développer aujourd'hui un collectif pour aider à 360 degrés? Qu'en est-il aujourd'hui du Small Business Act? Parce que vous n'en avez pas parlé et je reste convaincu que beaucoup de mesures sont faites, parce que vous avez vu le financement, j'ai vu un peu la toile d'araignée qui a été faite, et je considère que s'il n'y a pas une approche holistique, et le Small Business Act en est un, et je pense qu'il faut que dans ce cadre d'accompagnement de votre part, pousser pour aujourd'hui qu'il soit sur place. Et le dernier point, qu'en est-il aujourd'hui de l'accélération des business angels, notamment au niveau de la diaspora, parce que c'est souvent des gens qui sont très sensibles à maintenant faire du give back tout en restant chez eux. Donc voilà un petit peu, mais pour pas trop prendre la place, les 3 sujets que je voulais aborder, sur lesquels je souhaiterais avoir votre retour. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Maybe we can have another intervention, question or comment, and then we give the floor to our panelists to respond. I can see Mr. Ahmed Abdelnader. Please go ahead, Mr. Ahmed.
Oui, bonjour. Vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Bonjour. Je remercie tout d'abord tous les intervenants. Et j'ai, si vous permettez, une idée ou 2 à vous proposer. Vous savez que tous les éléments et les variables qui ont été cités par les intervenants pour appuyer le développement de l'investissement basé sur le genre sont bien sûr importants et nécessaires. Je peux ajouter 1 ou 2 éléments. Le premier, à mon avis, c'est la nécessité d'adopter l'approche du budget sensible au genre à tous les niveaux, au niveau local, dans les municipalités ou autres, et au niveau national. Et il faut vraiment l'adopter réellement, pas uniquement sur les papiers. Tous les budgets, quel que soit le domaine, doivent être sensibles au genre. La deuxième proposition, et cette proposition provient d'une expérience menée depuis des années maintenant dans la structure que je représente, qui est le Centre de la femme arabe pour la formation et la recherche, qui est un centre régional ici en Tunisie. C'est l'intégration de l'éducation financière dans les projets et les activités d'autonomisation des femmes. Quel que soit le thème, quel que soit le sujet, quelle que soit l'activité ou le programme, il faut intégrer cet élément d'éducation financière. Ça permet vraiment à la femme d'accéder aux moyens de financement et de connaître surtout comment intégrer ces sources de financement, ces moyens de financement. Et je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. I can see also Mr. Omar Agodim. You have the floor, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Omar Agodim from UNDP Morocco. We are working on how to help women entrepreneurs, low-income women entrepreneurs. And one point that I think it is important to discuss and to bring analyze before intervention is the traditional biases that we can see in different country, in different region. And to be simple, for the case of Morocco, we have a big difference when we talk about urban to rural area in terms of promoting women entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Okay, Miss Laura Wafo, you have the floor.
Allô, bonjour à tous. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
It's not clear, really.
Allô, là, vous m'entendez bien?
Oui. C'est mieux maintenant.
Bonjour à tous, je suis Laure Wafo, je suis économiste coordinatrice de la plateforme ENA, une plateforme régionale pour l'entrepreneuriat en Afrique du Nord de la Banque africaine de développement. Et je voudrais saluer la pertinence et l'intérêt de cette étude, d'autant plus qu'au niveau de la plateforme, nous avons récemment clôturé une étude sur le profil entrepreneurial du Maroc qui est basée sur une enquête représentative à l'échelle nationale et régionale qui nous donne un peu les caractéristiques et les contraintes auxquels font face les entrepreneurs au Maroc. Non seulement les entrepreneurs établis, mais également on a des informations assez détaillées sur les entrepreneurs potentiels. Et à partir de cette étude, de cette enquête-là, un policy brief ou un rapport spécifique sur l'entrepreneuriat féminin suivra. Et ce que je voudrais partager, c'est que nous sommes en phase avec les résultats et les alarmes qui ont été soulevés aujourd'hui. En ce sens que même lorsqu'on observe les entrepreneurs potentiels, on se rend compte que si les mesures, les initiatives de promotion de l'entrepreneuriat adéquates ne sont pas mises en place, les mêmes schémas, les entrepreneurs, hommes comme femmes, feront face aux mêmes contraintes demain. Il est véritablement important de réussir à lever toutes ces contraintes-là. Une question que j'avais, c'était par rapport à la présentation de l'Égypte, parce que l'une des recommandations que nous avons, c'est les initiatives ou projets d'investissement, de soutien à l'entrepreneuriat à travers les chaînes de valeur. J'aimerais savoir si il y a un success story de projet de chaîne de valeur qui a réussi à appuyer efficacement les femmes entrepreneurs en Égypte. Si vous pouvez partager des références spécifiquement sur cela. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Ms. Laura. Actually, before I give the floor to the panelists, I see another hand, Mr. Mohammed Soufiane. Please go ahead. Mr. Mohammed Soufiane.
We cannot hear you, Mr. Mohammed Soufiane.
Hello. So maybe till Mr. Mohammed Soufiane is ready, maybe I give the floor. I think let me give the floor first to Dr. Amal, because there was the last question on Egypt's experience to elaborate, addressed by Ms. Laura. Maybe Dr. Amal can elaborate on that, please.
Yes, sure. I think the question was on women integration in value chains in Egypt, and a lot of that is happening with respect to the agricultural, in many of the agricultural value chains. For example, in the area of one of the experiences that we had worked with and created some success with in the time when I was with the ILO was in the pomegranates value chain, for example. This is a value chain in Upper Egypt. Pomegranates are normally grown in Upper Egypt. In the past, women would be working in terms of just, picking and packing the value, picking and packing the pomegranates, but we were also able to add value by working on producing value on the site, for example, like, using the leaves and the stuff to create fuel and stuff like that. So this was an area where we were able to add to the value chain that was already in place, that had many women integrated, but also to create byproducts from this value chain where women can engage other women on some of the business created around the byproducts of that particular value chain, for example.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kobus, the floor is yours if you want to, if you have any comment or input.
Amal, sorry, was this question directed at myself as well?
If you want to talk about the experience in general in North Africa, but anyway, I see another hand now, Mr. El Sadiq Musa Ahmed. Then we'll take it from there. Mr.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Amal. And hear my voice?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Sadiq Musa. I'm from Multimedia University, Malaysia. I'm originally Sudanese. Actually, I didn't get the concept of a smart investment. We need more elaboration about smart investment in terms of, although the title is gender, the focus in women entrepreneurship. Smart investment, it should be actually, we are in the digital era, then it should be a new business model. a new business model in order to have this smart investment for women to involve in new business in the era of digitization and digitalization. So I wish I can get some feedback from this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There are also from the question and answer chat box. I don't know if the panelists can see the questions. So, for example, there is a question from Clelia Savari on, could you please give concrete examples of policies and initiatives that address digitalization and innovation for gender economic empowerment?
I think I'll tackle that one.
Okay.
So yes, one of the, I'll just give you one example. One of the initiatives is the World Bank's Empower, I think it's Empower Women, correct me if I'm wrong, Empower Women initiatives. And it actually, and it speaks to someone else's comment as well, but it's actually about connecting rural women to digital skills and digital startups. So the digital startups would then develop digital solutions to help the women in the rural areas. And the ways in which they do that is to develop apps or digital online platforms. Now, for instance, the digital online platforms would be such that it will be kind of a marketplace. And these rural women can then sell their crafts and produce, be it clothes or carpets or whatever it might be, sell it on those platforms. And things like that's really important because typically small or startups, aside from funding being a key requirement, you need a market to sell your products to. So that's a very important aspect. You need a market ultimately to sell your product. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can see other question. There is actually a report shared by the Economic, Social and Environmental Council of Morocco on, gender equality by Mr. Fouad Ben Siddiq. So thank you for that. No, for now, there are no more questions. If there are any questions from the floor, yeah, I can see Mr. Mohammed Sufyan. Go ahead, please.
Hello, are you able to hear me this time?
Yes.
Perfect. So my name is Sufyan Tintalsin. I'm the Partnerships and Business Development Officer for Education for Employment Europe. And I want to thank all the panelists for their brilliant presentations and even the questions that were asked that were helpful. And I want to ask on the sectors, because I want to ask if there are specific sectors that women entrepreneurs tend to lead to, because from the research that Dr. Amal Mouali showed, or Mouafi, sorry, that she showed, it shows that there is a great support for women, but mainly I think the numbers were 24,000 on entrepreneurship and 2,000 on handicrafts. And I want to try to understand whether that's by design, meaning were these women supported into the field of handicrafts because there was a plethora or a significant number of women that were already in the field, or was it because they wanted to lead them into that field? And I want to know if there are any economic sectors that women entrepreneurs have thrived in over, meaning that there's a high number of, and they've been very successful. I hope my questions are clear, so thank you very much for the opportunity to ask.
Okay.
I'll have a go. Sorry, Dr. Amal, if you want to have a go.
Yeah, no, please go ahead, please.
Mohammed, thank you so much for the question. From what I could hear, and I struggle to hear part of it, I think there's not one particular sector or two sectors or three sectors. I think it's going to be based on a case-by-case basis and a country-by-country basis. So there'll need to be assessment in terms of where, where's the most vulnerable women, where's the most potential to uplift women through gender lens investing. I know, or rather, let me put it this way, from an investor's point of view, so a gender smart investor, he or she is going to consider whether they get a return on their investment ultimately, right? So that they typically tend to focus on high yielding sectors, or what they often deem as sectors that can give them return on investment in the future. And this is where you start looking at things like digital. And now, as I think Dr. Amal alluded to, also someone else, if it wasn't you, Dr. Amal, I apologize, but bringing up the climate change, and that's booming. So they're going to typically look at those kind of areas. That's just some thoughts. Dr. Amal, if you want to add.
Sure. Let me just comment on that. I mean, what I was trying to say is that somehow the trainings that are offered in the traditional sectors, while the world is changing and evolving to new sectors, and we are not keeping pace with what's happening, and we're not offering those types of trainings for either existing or potential women entrepreneurs, and we're sort of locking women in the traditional sectors. And if women are not in STEM education, they tend to be more locked in those traditional sectors that cater to the art parts and stuff like that. It's not like that they're going to go away, but as we were talking about return on investment, where the financing is going to be coming in the majority of it towards climate finance and that sort of thing. So we want to make sure that females are part of this discourse if we're talking about gender smart investment. So that was the point that I was trying to allude to. And the majority of our APICS institutions that provide financial and non-financial services tend to provide services around the traditional and the conventional sectors rather than the new sectors, not because of anything, they're not keeping pace with the evolutions that are happening.
Thank you very much. I can see also from the floor that Ms. Huda Mijri, an expert in gender, wants to take the floor. The floor is yours, Ms. Huda.
Hello, could you hear me, please, Ms.
Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
Well, thank you for giving me the floor. And a big thank you and congratulations to all the presenters for these exhaustive presentations. I'm really glad to see that the North Africa office is ever so committed, as usual, to gender issues and is building on what has already been done. And I'd like to, in this regard, to just refer to previous studies on women's access to funding, especially rural women. I would have loved to see this issue raised in today's presentations. Maybe they have been raised in the report you have expounded today, but it wouldn't be. I think it would be useful to see what has been done from that. I mean, from that period. I mean, the 2014 when the study was undertaken, and to see as well whether the recommendations have been implemented and to what extent improvement has been achieved. This is one thing. The second point I'd like to raise is monitoring and evaluation, as has been mentioned by Dr. Amal from Egypt. It's important indeed, and we measured the real importance of this when ECA with the African Peer Review Mechanism undertook a review mission on governance in Egypt. And we had to cover the gender chapter, and it was interesting to see that although the policies and the strategies were absolutely advanced, and I would say even very progressive, but implementation, unfortunately, was still lagging behind. And I would like to as well suggest to refer to the findings of this evaluation review undertaken by the APRM. One of the impediments or major obstacles to the development of women's entrepreneurship is definitely access to finance, as has been raised in today's presentation, but also in the studies I have referred to, and as well the very, very unequal and unfair or very unequal access to land, as has been rightly raised by Dr. Susanna. If these simple inequalities are not raised or addressed properly and adequately, I really don't see how gender smart investment could, for inclusive development, could do justice to women as a whole in North Africa. I just wanted to make these comments, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Huda. Before I give the floor to Dr. Amal to comment, I just assure you that in our knowledge management network, we have featured all these excellent reports that were done before, and I know that it was under your leadership, and we're building actually on that. And it's featured well in our network. Now I give the floor to Dr. Amal to respond. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Definitely, thanks for the reference to the reports, and definitely they add to the knowledge repository. But I can't agree more. I mean, on the dichotomy between the urban and rural. Of course, this is very pertinent, and it's important to bring forward in the discussion of this report, because we tend to look at the averages at the national level, but the disparities across the nations are huge. And when we talk about the case of Upper Egypt, and the same, of course, in other parts of North Africa, around the metropolitan and the northern ends, things tend to be better, and they tend to be much worse towards the south. And when I gave the example of Nida Foundation, this is the foundation that is helping rural women actually in Upper Egypt, and trying to have them move not only from being, micro entrepreneurs, but being part of value chains that are being productive, whether in carpentry, for example. And this is, where the first time in Egypt to have women work in carpentry in Upper Egypt, this was like a male-dominated sector. And, you're able to get women in this sector because there is a higher return on a higher return that comes from working in that sector compared to other sectors in this rural province. So trying to move women also to more lucrative value chains rather than being stuck in traditional value chains that are less lucrative. If I have answered your question. On monitoring and evaluation, I have emphasized it in my presentation. You have brought it forward, and I think, my recommendation to our friends at the ECA North Africa is to make sure that when they speak about policies, they speak about, actionable items, as well as monitoring and evaluation of implementation, as well as research and learning, not to mention accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We still have 10 minutes. I can see also 2 hands. I'll give the floor first to Mr. Wajdi Khtiri. Please go ahead.
Hello, you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. First of all, my name is Wajdi Kfiri, Chief Economist at ITSEC, Tunisia. First of all, thank you for this event, for the organizer, and thank you for the two interesting presentations. I would like to underline the importance of the cultural and social perception as a main factor to improve the role of the women in the Arab society. My question is why the change in the social perception and the culture in the Arab country, society country, why is weak or slowly? Even the women have become more educated, and their participation in the political position. The second question is, what's the role of the family in this case? And thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, we have in the question and answer chat box a similar question from Morocco. I will just also mention it so Dr. Kobus can answer both. Actually, in the chat box, it's like the World Economic Forum in August 2022 reported that it will take 115 years for the MENA region to achieve gender equality. In Morocco, there is a need to strike a balance between culture and it's like because it's highly patriarchal society and demands of gender equality. And definitely there is a huge challenge. In this sense, the distinguished participant is asking, how does this reconcile with gender lens or gender smart finance vis-a-vis the findings of the research that was done or presented by Dr. Kobus? So over to you, Dr. Kobus.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the question. Well, I don't know if I should thank you for the question, because it is a really, really tough question. Changing social perceptions. To be perfectly honest, you know, I guess there's various initiatives that can be used to drive a change in social perceptions. You know, I think education plays a large role in terms of this. I think I don't want to call it campaigns in general can play a large role. I think if there's something just popped into my mind, like women leaders engaging more, you know, prominent women leaders in these North African countries, making you know, not raising their voice, but you know, in broadening the reach of their voice, and acting as leaders in that sense for other women or for other females and females looking to start a business, whatever, to look up to and to encourage from to do that sort of thing. I agree that, you know, it is a very difficult thing to change. And we also, someone also mentioned, you know, that the role of women, you know, in terms of their responsibilities in households and all those kind of things. It is still a cultural issue as well, and there's various other dynamics also playing a role here, and these are challenges. Yeah, the only other thing I could say maybe is that sorry, the other question was around it only being achieved by 2050. Is that right, Amal? The cultural perceptions and so on only being achieved by 2050. I honestly can't say when this will happen.
Changing culture actually is more difficult and takes longer time than changing systems. Yeah.
Yes. But I think you can accelerate the process at least. So, you know, gender smart investing and investing in more female-owned businesses and entrepreneurs, and also along the lines of some of these things I mentioned earlier, that can start accelerating this cultural shift. And I want to just highlight one thing that I mentioned earlier, and this what I was referring to is an innovative culture. And I think there's various country examples across the world that one could look at, which have very excellent innovative cultures. That starts really with education right at the bottom, at the start. And that to me is of paramount importance. I hope that answers your question. I know it's not a perfect answer, but it is a bit of a multifaceted question.
It's a bit challenging. Thank you very much. We still have less than 5 minutes, and we have two participants actually, Mr. Zakaria Fahim and Mr. Isa Guja. I will give the floor to Mr. Isa and then Mr. Zakaria, and then we close. Mr. Isa.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for giving me the chance to express. And I think my observation is around the last question that had been asked, which is if women has to be educated and also has to become a leader, and that she has to take important decisions in economic and political institutions, which is the role of family. Someone asked, so about the answer, I didn't really get it clearly. So if please could you be more specific so that I at least could understand something. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Let me just give also the floor. I can see Mr. Zakaria Fahim, and then we close. Yeah, Mr.
Oui, bonjour. Juste, je n'allais pas intervenir, mais il y avait deux choses intéressantes que je voulais partager. La première, pour l'avantage de ce type de rencontre, c'est que ça permet d'avoir beaucoup de monde, mais on ne voit personne. Et les troisième mi-temps restent très importantes. Comment vous pouvez mettre en lien des réseaux comme les nôtres avec les gens qui sont dans le tour de table, dans les invités notamment. Ma deuxième question, on n'a pas beaucoup parlé de la vraie problématique qu'on retrouve dans nos pays, de tous ces gens qui partent sans transmission. Et on a beaucoup de petites affaires qui auraient pu être reprises notamment par des femmes, si, quand on voit un peu les nouveaux bailleurs de fonds, qu'ils soient européens ou multilatéraux, exigent qu'il y ait cette intégration au lieu de dire, voilà, on va toujours financer la création, mais on finance des reprises, et ça permet à celui qui part d'avoir le sentiment d'avoir fait quelque chose d'intéressant, d'exister et de transmettre, et celui qui arrive, de gagner du temps. Et je pense que c'est un sujet qui est très, très peu discuté quand on parle de l'entrepreneuriat. On est toujours en train de partir de Greenfield, ce qui est quelque part souvent une absurdité, sauf quand on est sur des trucs très innovants et encore. Donc, est-ce qu'il y a une vraie réflexion pour qu'il y ait une ouverture vers des financements de reprise pour pouvoir effectivement permettre à des gens de partir avec un PQ, parce que souvent ils n'ont pas de retraite, et de permettre à ceux qui arrivent de ne pas confondre entrepreneuriat et création d'entreprise. Et puis ma première question, c'est comment vous allez créer du lien entre nous, parce que c'est très frustrant, on ne voit personne, on voit juste les 2-3 personnes alors qu'on est 100 personnes, donc c'est très frustrant.
Thank you very much for the IT issue. I give the floor to my colleague in charge of IT, Mr. Hamza, because I think there are issues with with Zoom itself. You cannot give the role of panelists to everyone, but anyway, Hamza, the floor is yours to explain, please.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Amal. I think this is a Zoom issue. When there is a Zoom webinar, we cannot allow the attendees to view the list of the participants. So this is a Zoom limitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the floor is to our distinguished panelists if they want to add something, because actually we're on time. Maybe we started a few minutes late. We can extend just a few minutes if there are any other questions or comments, but then I would invite you to share any questions or comments through our knowledge network, please.
I might just quickly respond to the question from Mr. Iza, I think. My apologies if I pronounced your name incorrectly. It's about the role of women in families versus, you know, women moving towards more of a entrepreneurial role. As we said previously, I think that's just a very multifaceted issue, and it's best to address that. Well, you can address it within the confines of a broader analysis, but it certainly is a multifaceted issue that has a lot of dynamics at play. So no quick answer on that, unfortunately.
I think any I think there are no further questions. At the end, I give the floor to Dr. Susanna Szwidrowski to close the meeting. Before that, I would like to just thank distinguished panelists, distinguished participants, and all my colleagues to support this webinar. Sorry for any challenges related to Zoom, but this is beyond our control. I think actually the webinar really managed to achieve the objectives in terms of really shedding light on the gender lens investing and its impact on entrepreneurship in North Africa, the major challenges that face North African countries in this issue. And with the challenges come the opportunities, the good practices for promoting the gender smart investing. And we had a detailed case study on Egypt on that. I think with that, I would like to really thank you all for that, and looking forward to more webinars and to your active participation and support. Thank you very much. Okay, bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.